During a rehearsal, I was asked the question, when does sound become music? I was then asked to improvise on this question for 10 minutes. The following is a transcription of what I said. I remember someone once said to me after a performance that they thought that what I had done was sound design and not music. I found that a very irritating thing to say. Sometimes I think that distinction is academic and not real. But in general, the 21st century so far, coming after an anarchic and constantly changing musical century, is extremely conservative. And this conservatism causes a problem in these distinctions. But that is sound design, and this question is about sound. Perhaps the more interesting question concerns when sound becomes music, rather than concerning their difference. I don't know whether the question itself suggests that sound is the origin of music. That I'm not sure about. I tend to think music begins with singing. But what is the difference between making a sound with your mouth and singing? And is singing the desire to impersonate a sound that you have heard? It's difficult to approach these questions without thinking of concrete examples. For instance, if you take an ordinary sound, like putting something on a table or moving a piece of furniture, and you repeat it once, and then repeat it once again after a short interval of time, that might be a very direct way of turning sound into music. By organizing sounds, ordinary sounds, in a way to bring a certain kind of attention, perhaps the sounds become music. However, it is not only music that demands attention from its sounds. In film, although there is a clear difference between music and sound effects, both want to draw your attention. Ordinarily, a sound effect, however artful, however contrived or exaggerated it might be, usually has a relationship to a visual source. The sound of a racing car, however elaborate, usually accompanies film of a car. There is a kind of concrete, logical, and diegetic necessity involved. Music, on the other hand, seems to have an essential lack of such necessity, although of course music has a huge role in relaying and shaping narrative. If sound in a sound effect has a clear source and logical function, music seems to occupy a different realm and to offer different orders of experience. I really like filmmakers who break down the distinction between the two, David Lynch or Lars von Trier, for instance. Lynch, especially while not a musician, is an incredible sound designer and always works with good musicians. The combination of music and sound design in David Lynch's films is perhaps the best answer to this question. Sound effects and music are constantly pouring into each other in his movies, and the distinction becomes more and more unclear. Working in electronic music, because there is such a great facility in the generation of sounds, I suppose it seems as though those sounds always come first. You might discover a sound that is very exciting, and your first thought is, what kind of music can I make from this sound? One of the reasons I like modal electronic synthesizers so much is the way in which sound design and musical expression are interrelated. It's so musical. I find using these synths that the sound-music division is very narrow. On the other hand, the Electron model series offers another alternative. When you treat every sound as a percussive sound to be repeated on a grid, you have the first and clearest option in transforming sounds into music. But with these sounds in electronic music, very quickly you start to search for structure of repetition or harmony or contrast of tension, something that will help form these sounds into some kind of object. But then, of course, you can have sound objects which are coherent, that don't do any of these things to suggest musical tension as such. I'm not fond of the term sound art, because often I find that people who make sound art want the benefits of the attention normally given to music, without taking responsibility for that attention and the forms that attention craves. Maybe that is an answer. Sound becomes music when it is organized unnecessarily into a structure offering its own kind of experience. But that all sounds too vague. Aesthetic answers are also not very useful. It is not a question of making something sound beautiful or pleasing or ugly or offensive. These categories can apply to both sound and music equally. Sound in itself might do everything you seek for music. Some might argue, perhaps following John Cage, that sound is already music, or even that sounds are more interesting than music. If you're in a room with some bad music playing and you open a window, perhaps the sounds of the street outside are more interesting. Maybe the street sounds are the real music, and they have simply swapped places. The music in the room becomes annoying, and the cars outside become what you most want to pay attention to. Is it something to do with tightening things up? Tightening up the order of sounds and memory? Maybe all music contains sounds that remind you of other music. It is very hard to listen with really fresh ears. Maybe music always has to refer to itself in that way, and sound remains innocent. Sound is free of that responsibility. I think in electronic music, sometimes you find that when you take sounds that seem filled with such power and you begin to organize them and transform them, you might lose what it was that made them interesting. I think that a lot of electronic musicians face that problem. There is a gulf between the discovery of the sounds themselves and the positioning of them to a structure that might be attractive to a listener. One of the reasons I like to improvise so much is that improvising gives you less time to overthink. You must react in real time, something very exciting in electronic music. So does music turn sounds into certain forms which correspond with other music? Of course, the real response to this question is another question. What do you mean by sound? Maybe sound becomes music when you let it do so, or when it has enough time to do so. Sounds and their relationship to each other as sounds is perhaps much more important in electronic music than in other kinds of music. Perhaps in some music, it is not quite so important to listen to distinctions at the sonic level. Perhaps again, like with so many good questions, this question cannot really be answered. Like the sound effects and music in a David Lynch film, all definitions begin to pour into each other and to disappear.